Hello, this is episode 5 of the Propane Fit.
It's not episode 5.
It's not episode 5.
No, it's episode 4.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the Propane Fitness podcast. We've got a couple of questions on carb backloading to respond to today. I'm sat here with Jonathan Burkan.
Hi everyone. So the question that we had on our Twitter account was, why do people get fat when using carb backloading? It's quite a general question. It's sort of like saying, why do people get fat when they eat? I think the thing that's of primary concern really is it's indicative of somebody using carb backloading as an excuse to justify overeating. So carb backloading is just a way of arranging calories and macronutrients throughout the day so that towards the end of the day, well, you eat all of your carbohydrate at night and then spread protein, fat throughout the morning and early part of the afternoon, and generally have most of your fat during the first portion of the day. And then depending on who you listen to, like whether if you're taking the carb backloading book as written, Keith will tend to advocate sort of higher fat carb choices in the evening as well. So basically what your day could end up looking like if you were to sort of just implement the advice as given, you could end up having sort of eggs, bacon in unlimited quantity throughout the day, and then towards the evening eat unlimited quantities of pizza and donuts, and then justify that by saying, oh well, I'm translocating GLUT4, which is the process that Kiefer talks about in his book. I'm translocating GLUT4, and therefore all of the excess calories will be apportioned to muscle tissue and not to fat. And unfortunately, it's simply not the case. Yusuf, what are your thoughts on people getting fat when using carb backloading? Do you think it's that they're misusing the system, or do you think that the system's failing?
I think the system itself is fairly robust. All of the principles of training and diet still apply when you're backloading, but I think people often throw that out of the window and feel that just because they're eating at night that it justifies poor food choices and ultimately poor macronutrient choices. So to use backloading as a tool is fine, provided you still fulfill the remaining constraints of hitting appropriate macronutrients for your goal, hitting appropriate calories for your goal, and training correctly.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not to criticise the book, because I do think that a lot of the information in it is very accurate and also very useful. But I think it does sensationalise the idea that assuming you avoid carbs throughout the day, you can eat next to anything in unlimited quantity at night. And Kiefer does go on to sort of provide guidelines for macronutrients, but I think ultimately, if you're gaining weight too fast and if you're gaining weight very quickly and you're a natural, unassisted weight training athlete, it's unlikely to be lean muscle gain. So regardless of when you eat carbohydrate, of when you time your food intake, if you're gaining, say, more than a pound a week, and even that would be a very sort of fast rate of gain, unless you're just new to weight training. If you're gaining a large amount of weight per week, that's unlikely to be very qualitative in nature, and that's likely to be predominantly fat and not much lean tissue. So I think what needs to be focused on really, regardless of the approach that you're using, is outcome-based decision making. So if you want to try carb backloading, that's fine. If you want to follow it as is written in the book, that's also fine. But if you start to gain weight at a rate that's faster than what would be reasonably expected of someone of your development and your ability, then I think you need to start making changes to your current approach.
I think that's quite a good point about current rate of development as well. One of the main problems with people getting fat with backloading is rather misinterpretation of Kiefer's guidelines. He certainly sets quite clear and reasonable guidelines within the book, but mainly from people assuming that they're more advanced than they are, that deadlifting 100 kilograms is going to warrant 500-600 grams of carbs in the evening, and then they blame Kiefer for getting the poor results. So yeah, it's kind of skewing what you want to hear and following something that deep down you know is overeating, but then blaming the process for the fatness that ensues.
Yeah. Well, I think it is very easy to fall into the trap of justifying things that are enjoyable. Even if you kind of know deep down, I probably shouldn't have the second tub of ice cream, but it's okay because I had a really good training session, and I didn't eat carbs all day, and it's fine, it'll all go to muscle. Like, it's simply not the case, unfortunately. And if it was, then I think carb backloading would still have a lot more popularity than it currently does. I think it went through a phase of being extremely popular when the book came out, and it kind of died down a little bit. And I think some of that might be because, as is implied in the question, some people followed it as per the book and got maybe some results that they weren't quite expecting, in that they just got fat. So I think I often get people ask me about the article that I wrote called "Why You Should Stop Counting Calories," and in that I reference sort of a carb backloading template when justifying an approach that means that you don't have to specifically count and weigh everything. And I think the point I was trying to make in that is that one thing that is good about carb backloading, if you were to choose an approach which is less precise and involves less sort of manipulation of food quantities and amounts, is that it is very good at controlling hunger. If you follow the simple rule of avoid carbs the first portion of the day, blood sugar is very stable in the main, and you do generally feel very satiated from a relatively small amount of food. And then when you go on to eat carbohydrate at night, that again stimulates a very potent hunger suppressing response. So I think if you are one of these people who doesn't necessarily want to pursue extreme levels of either leanness or performance, and you want more of a lifestyle type approach, I think backloading carbohydrate to the later portion of the day is a very good technique from a behavioural standpoint, and it helps, anecdotally, it helps a lot with concentration throughout the day. It helps keep hunger stable, and then it also sort of gives you something to look forward to in the evening, while kind of allowing you to eat fairly lightly during the day and still keeping hunger controlled. That said, and I think you'll probably agree with this, Yusuf, I think as soon as you start to move out of sort of what would be considered the normal range in terms of body fat or strength levels, I think you do need to be more sort of precise with tracking and monitoring your food, and it does at that point then become more about how many calories am I taking in, what effect is that having on me, how can I manipulate my macronutrient ratios to elicit various changes. And I think that's probably the stage that we're at with most of our clients, wouldn't you say, Yusuf?
Yeah, I think it's about exercising the appropriate judgment, and a lot of the time, if someone is making a poor decision with regard to that, you see the same thing with intermittent fasting as well, where people will assume that because they've done their fast, they can then just take the mick for the rest of the day because they've kind of done the dieting portion of their day. Whereas if that same person, it's not like they've made a judgment out of poor knowledge, where if they were training someone else, they would immediately tell them they'd be able to see that poor judgment in someone else, but because their emotions are clouding their own approach, then it
That's a very well-rounded point, that, Yusuf.
Yeah.
I think I know what you're trying to say, is that somebody's written a book which says, here you go, here's a template that allows you to eat a box of pastries at night. And I think even the most advanced weight trainers could read that book and go, well, this book is scientifically researched, there's references, pages and pages of references in the back, and this guy's got results to prove that this approach works. I'm going to now follow this as written, and I'm just going to disregard counting everything and tracking everything, because as long as I avoid carbs during the day, I can eat as much as I want at night. And I think that's the crux of the problem, really, is that, as you were saying with fasting, people exercise one kind of limitation or one change, and I think that because that they go through this period of sort of temporary restriction, that they're entitled to this phase of sort of unlimited hedonism in the evening. And I think it's not only does it kind of create a binge type attitude to food, but it also means that you spend most of your day focusing on the evening. And a lot of people get sick of just eating protein and fat all the time. There are pretty limited options, both from a personal preference standpoint and also a social standpoint, when you can only eat 30 grams of fibrous carbohydrate during the day. So you spend your entire day in this kind of semi-restricted state of mind, constantly focusing on, oh, well, I just need to go and train, and then I can, eat all the ice cream and all the things that I actually want to eat during the evening. And I think it's that kind of mindset that when you repeat that over a long enough time frame, the backloads start getting more out of control, and people's sort of overall caloric intake just becomes far greater than what they actually require. And I think if the people who were doing carb backloading would actually track their macros and track their calorie intake, it would end up simply looking like a high-fat, high-carbohydrate, calorie excessive diet.
If you asked anyone, if you were to follow a high-fat, high-calorie, high-carb diet, what results would you expect? And they'd probably say quite bad. Say, well, how is changing the timing of those nutrients slightly going to make a significant difference? It may partition them slightly more effectively, but the overwhelming influential factor on that whole thing will be total macros. And I think Kiefer would certainly agree that if someone's going to make an absolute atrocity of the macro choices, then no matter whether you backload or not, it's not going to redeem it.
Yeah, but I think that Kiefer certainly makes a strong argument as to that there are some mechanisms that underlie his approach that suggests that perhaps, assuming taking two diets of equal macronutrient ratios, if you were to take one and split your carbohydrate throughout the day versus the other where you backload your carbohydrate at night, ultimately Kiefer's hypothesis is that negatively skewing your carbohydrate towards the end of the day will yield a leaner mass gain. And that might be the case. And I think that taking it like that and simply using it as a way of timing your carbohydrate intake and leaving your other macros so that, protein's at a sensible amount and it's based on body weight and fat's still a sensible percentage of total calories, then I think there's absolutely no harm in the approach, and I think that it can work just fine.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. It's just a very illogical jump to then say, well, if we were to have terrible macros and poor choices and other aspects of our nutrition and training, then it'll all be attenuated by the fact that you're backloading.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I actually find that when I do backload carbs, both with myself and with clients, towards the end of the day, you tend to get this massive sort of sleep-inducing effect after you eat 200, 300 grams of carbs in one meal at night. And I think maybe for most people, it's better from a psychological standpoint, especially if they have anything to do at night, like work or revision or whatever it might be. If you're going to get home and eat a meal which then sends you into a coma on the sofa in front of the TV, that's maybe not the best decision from a social point of view. And it might actually be better to have 2 or 3 meals, if you want to fast, 2 meals, whatever, or even if you want to include breakfast. It might be better from a social point of view to have smaller carb feedings throughout the day, even if that is slightly less optimal. If it means that you're able to then stick to something consistently and that you're not constantly sat at your desk at work craving the tub of ice cream or the slice of cake that you've earned by avoiding carbs throughout the day. So that's maybe just a slightly different, less scientific way to view it, is that if by following a carb backloading template you create this kind of binge attitude to food and you create this desire to increase your caloric intake, then maybe something like a carb backloading structure isn't for you, and you might even be better with even eating breakfast, lunch and dinner of equal sized meals. What are your thoughts, Yusuf?
Yeah, I think that sums it up really. Nothing else to add on that one.
Cool. So the second question we had was, it was on carb backloading again, and it was, how do various forms of cardio affect carb backloading?
I'm assuming that this question comes from a concern of whether doing high-intensity cardio inhibits the glycogen resynthesis when you backload on that day or for the next day or two. I would personally not worry about it. I think if you're in a calorie deficit, you're aiming for fat loss, you're doing high-intensity cardio, provided, again, subject to all the constraints we mentioned earlier, that you're hitting your normal calorie numbers and you're not just going mental on carbs, then the overall effect is going to be not even noticeable.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I read that question, I think the first thing I think is that there's a huge focus on detail, which I think is probably unnecessary. The way I view cardio when I'm working with people is that it's a tool to achieve a certain outcome. And yes, you can argue that cardio, when used in the fasted state or first thing in the morning or whatever, has a greater propensity to burn fat over lean tissue, etc. But ultimately, cardio is additional calorie expenditure within a unit of time. So if you spend 40 minutes during your day doing cardio, then that's an extra 400 calories of calorie expenditure on top of what you're already burning by just being yourself. And that's a good tool to use when trying to lose weight. You can increase your theoretical calorie deficit while leaving your food intake the same. I think when somebody asks, how does cardio affect carb backloading, what that's suggesting to me is, how can I exercise to increase the amount of food I can eat? I mean, I might be reading it wrong, but backloading is just a way of distributing food. So if you take it at its face value, you could say that if I increase cardio, then in theory you could eat more food and still keep the overall effect to be the same. I know that Kiefer speaks about how high intensity interval training can create some translocation of the GLUT4 transporter proteins, but I'm not entirely familiar with that. I think generally speaking, if you're going to use cardio, use it, keep it in your arsenal as a tool to use when fat loss slows. I wouldn't start considering cardio in a way of, how can I implement it to start affecting GLUT transporters, and how can I implement it in my day so that I can eat more carbs at night. I don't know, maybe I'm reading into it wrong. Yusuf, what do you think?
Yeah, likewise. I don't want to make any assumptions about the impetus behind this question, but if it is about how can I use cardio to justify eating more, then it seems like either calories are too low because you're too hungry during your diet, or maybe the food choices are too low. And there's an article on our website talking about satiety. I'll stick a link in the description, where just modifying the food choices and the calorie density of your foods according to your diet allow you not to ever feel deprived or too hungry or too satiated on the flip side during a diet by switching the food choices.
Yeah. I think just kind of to summarise, really, my sort of personal opinion on to take carbs and cardio as two separate things, regardless of what you're doing, whether it be cutting or bulking. I would always favour somebody's carbs to be as high as they can possibly be, while keeping any mass gain as lean as possible, or while losing fat as efficiently as possible. And then on the flip side of that, I would always keep cardio as low as possible while still achieving your goal. So if you're in a fat loss phase, the last thing you want to do is start with several sessions of HIIT cardio in the morning just because you're doing it to enhance the effect of carb backloading. You want to implement it as fat loss slows and as it's needed. And then with carbs as well, it does take some experimentation. Some people respond better to a higher percentage of calories coming from fat. But generally speaking, from personal experience and client experience, performance is generally maintained much better when carbs are higher, and people can continue to progress with their strength work while in a calorie deficit, as long as carbs form a reasonable percentage of calories. And then equally for when in a mass gain phase, I think that people tend to respond best when the calorie increase comes from carbohydrates, but while keeping fat to sort of 20 to 30% of calories, and not really changing the ratios that you would have from a cutting phase. So that's just personally how I approach both of those things, and within that frame of context, if you want to use a carb backloading framework to keep your carbs in your day, then I think that's absolutely fine. And if you do want to use HIIT cardio or low intensity cardio or sport as cardio, I think all of those are fine, as long as the cardio is included for the right reasons and not so that you can enhance something that is kind of questionable how important it is in the overall scheme of things.
With our own clients, we obviously don't prioritize cardio as the primary reason for fat loss. Maximum 2 sessions a week, if that. But a lot of clients, the main thing we just advise is fasted walks, which are more for recovery and psychological reasons than fat loss. But the primary factor in fat loss is always going to just be diet.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Okay, well, I think that we only really got 2 questions this week, so as Yusuf, I think, said on the Facebook page, we obviously answered all possible questions in the articles that we've written.
Amazing.
But yeah, if you do have any questions, anything you want to hear us talk about, anything in any of the articles that you didn't agree with and you want to tell us how stupid we are, then all of those things are fine. Just comment on the Facebook page and we'll make it the subject of our next podcast. So that's the Propane Fitness Podcast, episode 4, and we'll speak to you soon.